I'm here today with Mark LeFebvre, and Mark has got this great idea that we're going to discuss the meta view of the Jordan Peterson, John Vervaeke discussion. So I'm going to throw the ball in your court, Mark, and see what you've got to say.
Sure. Thanks for having me. This is sort of exciting. Our mutual friend Michelle said you should reach out to Karen and the meeting code and find out if she wants to talk about this. And I was like, what a great idea. So the thing that's interested me the most is so Manuel Post and I, we sit on the AptMC Discord, right, Working for the Meaning Crisis Discord, and we were like, wow, what a great talk! This is amazing. It's so right. And then all these people were coming in, going, do you think Jordan's on drugs? Like, is he gonna crack? And then Paul Vanderklay starts doing these videos about, dude, I'm worried about Jordan, and I'm just like, what talk did you watch? This was like, I was stunned. I was absolutely like, what happened? I don't get it. And then I realized that a couple of weeks before the talk happened, because John had sort of indicated that, right, this was going to happen. So people knew. And people had asked me like, oh, we heard this talk's coming. And they know like, well, yeah, we're the Vervaeke guys. And they're mostly people on Bridges of Meaning, but also some of our own guys on the Discord server. And they were, what do you think is going to happen? And I'm like, well, I mean, it's going to be deep conversation. And I was kind of pointing out to them, look, when my first conversation with Paul, right, which you saw, I put forth the thesis that John's got this nice framework, this science of meaning, and Peterson fits right in there. Like there's no real conflict. And again, I don't know if I could prove it. I got challenged once and I sort of dodged that bullet, but there could be more coming. But so far, so good. And I think that really, from my perspective, that sort of this talk supports my thesis that their work fits so well together that, they were having this very deep sort of conversation. And there seemed to be sort of two camps, right? And I do have some notes here that I'm going to be referring to. So I don't want you to think like I don't want to like I'm like looking off for no reason. So there's sort of two major camps, I would say, right? There's the major camp of people who want to push Peterson towards religion or over the cliff of Christianity, or whatever phraseology you want to use, but want to push him further in the religious direction, we'll say. And that's one major camp of people. And then of course, that would, in theory, result in all the people that follow him following him, right, to that conclusion. And so I think all the theological people like Paul Vanderklay, et cetera, are in that camp, right, to some extent. And then another camp would be the people who want him to go more secular and solve the problem in that space, right, like whatever. So the Vervaeke people want that. And then there's two other important camps, right? So there's another camp that says, look, if you like the Jordan Peterson message, wait till you see John Vervaeke, man. He's way better. You're going to just jump on his train instead. I think I love John. John, I sit on the Discord server devoted to his work. I don't think anything like that's ever going to happen. I wish it could, but I just don't. I don't see the same charismatic desire and willingness and the same level of exploration. John's an academic. He wants to stay an academic. Fair enough. Like that's where he belongs for sure. He's very good at it. He's better at it than most academics for sure. But I think that's kind of nuts. And then I think the other of the sort of minor camps, these are small groups of people in my mind. The other of the minor camps is that people who are open to, who are accepting of, well, we'll see what happens. Like it's going to be beautiful, but we'll see what it is. Like they weren't casting any expectations. But I think the other three camps had expectations. They had clear expectations going in. So they've got this narrative framework. They're expecting one of these results, right? And they're expecting, more importantly, to see, are they going closer to the religious side or closer to the secular side, right? Or are they going closer to everyone just deciding Peterson's done and all the new work is with Vervaeke or something, right? And that seems to be the camps that people have fallen into in my mind in looking at this. But it was so puzzling. I was just like, what is going on? Because I thought it was gorgeous. I thought it was beautiful. I watched the video only once, to just disclaimer, but I did take notes, and that took 4 hours or 5 hours, somewhere in that range. Now, I've never taken that kind of time ever to take notes on it. What is it, an hour and 20 minutes or something? So, wow, right? I mean, there were sections I had to listen to literally 10 times, the same timestamp, just to
Mhm.
get the notes correct, because it was so deep. And I think
Mhm.
that's one of the things people were missing. They're looking for them to go further in a certain direction. And I'll argue they went further, but not in a direction, right? They went deep. But they
Well,
were looking.
that's why I think you're missing the fifth element, right? You ever see that movie? It's a great
Yes.
movie. Yes. Okay. So you specified 4 camps. There's really a fifth camp. The fifth camp is looking at the dialogos between them. The logos in Jordan speaking to the logos in Vervaeke, and they're coming to some new thing together. And that was what I saw. I saw what was in each one of them striving towards the other and coming to some new thing, or a deep desire to come to something new and never maybe quite getting there, whatever that thing is. That was what I kept watching happen all the way through the whole thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I would put you in the open camp, open to, expecting great things, but open, not expecting a thing, expecting
Mhm.
something great, which is a different aspect in how you approach something, right? And it's not
Okay.
goal oriented. It's more what John would call being mode, right? Because he
Mhm.
takes that from being mode. And although he uses becoming mode, which I think he should do more often. It's really becoming mode, right? Rather than having mode. Everybody else has this having mode attitudes. This is one of Manuel's great insights. He said everybody's having a having mode attitude towards this talk. Like they're going to have this thing at the end of the talk. And it's like, no, this is true dialogos. And
Mhm.
it was very telling to me. So we watched not all, but some of the talk that David Fuller and Paul Vanderklay did, right? And they opened that talk with the clip from the end of the talk where the two guys are saying, this was great, really wonderful conversation, really felt like we had dialogos the whole way through. And then they immediately say, we don't know what was going on in this talk. We didn't see any dialogos. And I was just like, I don't like what these guys
Well,
clearly
this
say
is
about
why I
it.
think they needed some sort of a translator key, because whenever they got into this thing where they're jumping on each other's throats, I could totally translate. See, my background is teaching English as a second language. And so I'm always conscious of translating people to each other, even if they're both English speakers, native English
Right.
speakers still need to be translated to each other. And, I was hearing both of them wishing that I could just stop frame and saying, here's what Jordan is saying,
Right.
and here's what John is saying. But instead, it would sometimes take them quite a while to get through that space to where they could actually grasp what the other one was saying and come into this new space.
Right. So I think that everybody had a misalignment of goals in the talk, right? So one of the misalignments is that, what's the goal of the talk? Well, like I said, I think, we've got roughly 4 camps, and, you and I are more in the open camp, right? Along with Manuel Post and a handful of other people, really. Everybody else was looking for something, right?
Mhm.
And I think that the goal, I saw very much that the goal for Jordan was specific. Jordan's got these questions, these deep questions that he needs answers to. And my friend Tracy, who's on the AftMC Discord server, she made a absolutely brilliant observation. She's a writer. She's brilliant, and she's a writer. She's a brilliant writer. She's really awesome. And she said Peterson was very much looking to Vervaeke as the father. He's like the son asking father the questions. And the more I watched, Paul's breakdowns, he's up to part 3 on his breakdowns. He's getting better. He's getting more open as he breaks this talk down. You see it. You see it all over the place. And the minute Tracy said it, I was like, oh, absolutely, that's what was going on. Because it was definitely the same thesis I had, that Peterson wants answers to these questions. So you might say, well, what questions? What are you talking about? Well, one of the things Jordan's talked about a lot is his idea of postmodern neo-Marxism, right? And seriously, I've watched hundreds of hours, and that's another problem with this video. You need hundreds of hours of Peterson, and you need 100 hours of Vervaeke. That's a minimum. And then you need to really have absorbed it. And then you need to really have a lot of cognitive capacity to follow this stuff, because it's really deep. But if you watch enough Peterson, he asks that question all the time. What do you think about my theory that the problem is this postmodern neo-Marxism? And what he gets from people reliably until he talked to John was, oh, that's a silly question. It's too silly to address. You just don't understand postmodernism. That's it. That's not a critique, right? That's not a critique. So here's a man with a very deep thesis that seems to match a bunch of the things he's witnessing in the world, right? And he sees this clearly, clear as day. I happen to think he's right, by the way, just in case there's any, right? Any confusion. No, I think he's correct. I see it too. I've seen it for years as well.
I want to interject here and say the important aspect of that whole thing is that he sincerely wants the truth. He doesn't want to be right.
Exactly.
He wants to know whether he is speaking truth or not speaking truth.
Right. He wants a critique. He wants a serious critique.
Yes.
Because the problem is, if you go to somebody and you say, look, postmodern neo-Marxism, do you think that's a thing? Because that's really the base question. There's more questions after that, but the base question is this even a possible combination of things in the world? And you get...
And in our next talk, when we get down in the weeds on this, I want to talk about what's underneath that postmodern neo-Marxism issue so that we can get at what really is the thing, what the source of that thing is. So let's put a pin in that for the next time we talk.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, so if you go to somebody, you make that statement like, is this a possible combination in the world? And they go, you just don't understand postmodernism. You haven't been critiqued. You've been brushed off. You've been put aside. You've been, just like told, like, stop asking silly questions, little boy, literally. And if you really, like, that doesn't engender understanding. People that do that annoy me. It's like, no. If I'm wrong, I want to know why. I want to know how. I want to know these things, or at least get pointed in the direction where I can find how and why. And when you're not pointing somebody in the direction they can find how and why, and you're not really refuting their point, you're really, you're acting unfairly. You're acting tyrannical. You're saying, no, I just have all the answers and you have none. And therefore, and that's not fair. So here's John Vervaeke. And John Vervaeke, I think he said this, spent like 2 years studying Foucault and Derrida and postmodernism in general. And so, and I don't know if this is lost on people, John's really smart, right? And like, if I had to take a bet on who's smarter, I'd say John's smarter than Jordan. And I love Jordan, but John's really smart. John's an amazing mind, right? And he's quick too. Jordan may be slightly quicker, but John's got depth like you would not imagine. I mean, it's just that my interactions with him, plus some of the stories I've heard, are like, so this is a guy who can do this. And I'll state this. I've stated this before. I'll state it now on YouTube for posterity's sake. He's the only person that can and will give Jordan a fair hearing. Like, there may be other people who know enough to give Jordan a fair hearing, but John will, because they're colleagues and they've done this before. Like, that's the thing that people don't understand. They're colleagues. They've talked before. They've talked about each other's work before. There's one video recorded, one that never got recorded, right? Paul talks about this, but I don't think he got the significance at the time. They've talked in the halls. Jordan said at the end, I've been following your work. I'm a real admirer of it, that's part of
He's also not cowed by him, so he's willing to tell him the truth.
Exactly. So there's a relationship there that, honestly, non-academics, like I grew up in Boston. So like, I hung out at MIT. I hung out on the Harvard campus. Like, you get to see how these people interact, academics interact with each other when you're around enough of them. In Boston, man, there's 30 some colleges and universities in 10 miles. There's academics everywhere. If you need to see academics interact, walk around Boston. You'll bump into it. It'll be there. Or you can just walk into the damn schools and check them out. Like, the doors aren't locked. You can just walk in, or at least they didn't. Who knows in the post-COVID world. But yeah, so I'm kind of used to that. And I don't think about that. To me, it's how I grew up. But, other people may not be used to how academics interact like that. And I think once you understand the goal, that Jordan has a goal going in and that John's amenable to the goal, like John probably has some idea, right? Their last conversation that was recorded was along these lines of exploration and such not. And then I think that there's a deep confusion, right? aside from the comfort level and the familiarity of thought and the familiarity of interaction and the fact that they're kind of friends to some extent, right? Jordan invited him, you got to see the house, man. You got to see the top floor, right? And John's like, yeah, I'd love to, right? So aside from all that, the question is, why are people so resilient to this? And another gentleman comes on our server every once in a while, Rob Randolph, really smart guy, working on some great stuff. He said people are so stuck with false dichotomy, they can't deal with the synthesis of two thinkers. Like they're looking for the Philia Nikeia, the winner, right? Which is what John went over. And they're not looking for that synthesis, right? And to some extent, I think the synthesis happened, right? I think each thinker drove the other deeper in their own thought, right? Not right. So it was like Jordan would say something, John would go, oh, I see how that, can take me further. And John certainly did the same for Jordan. I would say Jordan probably got the better deal out of it from his own perspective, and John probably got the better deal out of it from John's perspective. Everybody wins. I really think that was an everybody wins conversation. If you want to couch it in those terms, but I think people were. I think subconsciously, when you have a goal that's not met, you're couching it in the Philia Nikeia terms. Like, I was looking for this, I didn't get it. I didn't have what I wanted out of the conversation. But it was so deep and hard to sort of understand. And I think, at some points, Peterson's playing with John very much. And Vanderklee started to see this in his third commentary. He started to see this. It's like, yeah, there's a bunch of times when Peterson's just poking at John, rather deliberately, right? And it's fun, I think, for both of them. It wasn't adversarial at all. And that's another thing, is that people sort of associate the interruptions themselves as being bad things, right? Like, oh, interrupting somebody's rude. It's like, well, not. Come on the AftMC Discord and watch Manuel post and I talk, right? Manuel and I talk, we interrupt each other constantly, right? No one's mad, right? Usually it's because—
I'm going to interrupt you right here. And I'm going to say that, that what I saw Jordan doing when he's poking him a little bit is he's trying to jumpstart John out of academic mode, because he's trying to get at something that's way beyond academic, right? So he's trying to just poke it, because John wants to go into academic mode. Jordan asked him some question. I forget he asked him to go into, I think it was the third aspect of knowing. And instead of just reiterating, or instead of re-explaining this third aspect in another way so that Jordan could understand his thesis, he starts out with, well, Rowan says, and so and so and so. And he started going down this academic road, trying to build up all the credentials behind the idea.
Right.
And it's like, Jordan's like, get to the bottom line here. We got stuff to do.
Right, exactly. So that's the thing. So like when you watch Manuel and I talk, we know each other pretty well. We know where we're going. So when I start down a wrong path, and sometimes it is sometimes it's a right path, sometimes it's a wrong path, sometimes it's just a path and nobody knows if it's right or wrong, he'll interrupt me, because either that sparks something in him, right? And then it could spark something in me, or because he knows where I'm going and he's like, yeah, shut up, let's move on. I've already know, right? And so there's lots of valid reasons to interrupt. There's lots of valid reasons. And so if you see interruption as just a negative thing in all cases, you're going to misread the conversation. You're going to get upset by it. Instead of realizing, to your point, I mean, your point was excellent, by the way. You really nailed the big condition there, which was, yeah, John, we know this, right? Let's move on. And the other thing to keep in mind, this was not made for an audience. This was made for Jordan. Jordan made this video for Jordan. He didn't make it for you. He doesn't know that you're watching. He doesn't care that you're watching. Not interested. He's only interested in getting the answers to his questions. And yeah, there's a big deal about treating things that way. And then, a lot of people are making the argument that, well, there wasn't enough Philia Sophia, and I want to have a Philia Sophia conversation. Like, it's not. Your conversation can be primarily Philia Sophia, but if you're making a truth claim, now you're into Philia Nikeia. Like, you can't proceed with Philia Sophia and a truth claim. The two are mutually exclusive, and people don't get that nuance. And fair enough, they didn't explain it in the talk, for example, but people don't get that. I
mean, that was one of the things that really stood out to me. I just had a conversation with Michael, and I brought up this fact that they didn't explore the usefulness, the necessity of Philia Nikeia, just in part of our motivational centers and all of that. And maybe they just didn't need to explore that with each other because they already understood it completely. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they were looking, even when John went deeper into Philia Nikeia, he was using it to say that Philia Nikeia used properly will morph into Philia Sophia, but I don't think that's true. I think that
No, I don't either.
That Philia Nikeia, it's an axis, and Philia Nikeia is this accuracy towards truth, and Philia Sophia is this expression towards community and the wisdom that can be gained in community. And those two things both have to be there. You can't have the one without the other.
Exactly. And then the question is it primarily Sophia or Nikeia, right? And then a debate is supposed to be purely Nikeia, right? And then other forms of conversation are supposed to be purely Sophia, right? Or close to it. And then I've been experimenting. I like these little word pairs. I've been coming up with lots of word pairs lately. But one I just came up with for you, Karen, for you personally, as part of my notes taking. So I've got this thing, truth claims versus proposing an idea, right? So that's something like exploration versus exposition. And I don't know if I'm actually using exposition correctly, but I think I am. So I think that's the difference right there. This exploration, or are you doing exposition? And exploration is Philia Sophia, and exposition is Philia Nikeia, right? And then,
so when you say exposition, you're meaning like explication, like accuracy, like specifying?
Yes. Yeah,
okay. And then when you say exploration, you're talking about proposing an idea with an openness of spirit and a willingness to have interchange and
or not even proposing an idea. Right. So when Jordan goes, what do you think about this? Right. And then he's not always proposing an idea. Sometimes he's outlining a framework or a set of words, and just to see if they can be associated. Right. So it's not.
I was really struck by this whole thing where they're looking at efficiency and resiliency, and then stability and plasticity. Because when they were talking about that, immediately what jumped into my mind was to see if I could map on, because I've been thinking a lot about accuracy and expression. And I was trying to see if they mapped on, and they don't, which is very interesting. But in all three of those, both of those things are essential. You can't have the one without the other.
Right.
And it's not that they produce a synthesis. I think that would be a category error, right?
Yes.
It's that they have to be a sliding scale that depends on the situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We get caught a lot in this false dichotomy, right? Where we're, trying to plant a flag and then trying to test that flag against other possible flags, right? And then when you simplify that, you get two. And we're always doing that. But actually, almost everything that, so if you wanted to categorize what we do on the AftMC Discord server, like we're really just a think tank, right, around John Vervaeke's ideas, and we sort of expanded way out from what John's talking about, right? And then when you look at these things, it almost always ends up with at least three axes. Always. It's never two.
Interesting.
Right. And it's always the intersection of three things with high contrast, right? So there are opposites, but like you have to have all three axes. So there's 6 things there. And where you are on those axes determines the thing. So that's fairly reliable. I'm not saying it's 100%. I'm not saying we're complete or anything like that, but we find this a lot, this 3-axis set. It just seems to be pretty much everywhere. And I think
that's built in. I mean, that's built into the universe. That's pretty clear. Yeah.
I would tend to think so.
I find it everywhere too. But the interesting thing is I find unity everywhere, and I find binary everywhere, or polarity everywhere. And I find the 3-axis everywhere. So it's the 1, 2, 3 shows up everywhere.
Yes.
But the interesting thing about polarity is that the thing that holds polarity together is both the some point on the spectrum from one side to the other side of the polarity, but then also the, I mean, if you're thinking about a foci and then an ellipse, the ellipse around the outside is kind of what is coming from one foci or the other foci. of the binary and the polarity and what holds it together. And then that creates a what did you call it? A 3-axis set.
Right.
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 And so that picture shows up everywhere too. So yeah, it's very fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. So we find that a lot. I think you found that in this talk, right? You find that
Well, Nate wanted to talk to me about the Trinitarian aspects of this talk. So we're going to be looking at those 3-axis sets everywhere in the talk.
Oh, that'll
we're
be
going to
great.
have that conversation. I think we are getting together the first part of next week. So.
Oh, that'll be thrilling. I'll watch that for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of aspects to and that's the thing too. Like the talk is very, very, very deep. It's so deep that John found new stuff in his own work and Jordan found new stuff in his work. But I think Jordan's goal of getting a reasonable critique of his most important axioms was accomplished. Now, I can't say that for sure. I'm not Jordan, obviously, but it looked to me like John capitulated enough, right? And
well, John certainly helped him with this issue of the postmodern Marxist critique.
I think in particular, that's put to bed by this talk.
That Jordan wants to understand that particularly because he feels so intensely about how that is affecting this moment in time, right?
Exactly.
But there was another question that he had that was such a burning question that when he was asking John about it, he kept saying, John, I need to know this thing. And he was that's the moment when he first did that. See, I watched the first 20 minutes of it or so, and then I stopped because I have a particular disposition that when I see something going south, I can't quite handle it emotionally.
Yeah,
and
me
it
too.
felt like it was going to go there for me. So at that point, I stopped watching it. And just out of my personal anxiety, I emailed Paul and I said something like, something's wrong here, And so I probably contributed to Paul's first video a little bit when he had this sense of anxiety about Jordan's personal stability. But after I continued watching the next day, I realized, oh, I see where this is going. I mean, it made perfect sense to me then because I didn't have enough context. In the first 20 minutes, I didn't have enough context to understand what was happening. Once I kept watching it, then I had the context. I could go back and I could rewrite my vision of that first 20 minutes and understand it at a different level.
That's interesting because Paul mentioned that a lot of people ditched out at 20 minutes and I didn't see it. So I was just riveted and like, I'm a big fan anyway. Like I'm going to watch anyway. I don't care if it's a dumpster fire. Like I love these two guys. So, but yeah, I didn't even notice the 20-minute mark.
I have this mother nurturing heart that wants Jordan to be okay because I believe that there's something so fundamental about what Jordan is thinking about that I want to be sure that he has an opportunity to communicate it to people.
Right.
And I don't want him to get lost in the weeds. And in one sense, this whole postmodern Marxist critique of our current moment, if he gets that wrong, it could very easily get lost in the weeds. He could get lost in the weeds because it could diminish his credibility. And so about that issue, I particularly want him to understand it at the best possible level. But I don't think that's the most important thing he has to say to us. Certainly,
no, not at all.
Culturally, it's necessary right now to have that moment. But, many times they got to this place in the conversation where Jordan said, maybe what we ought to do is just ignore it and then do the right thing. And maybe that's the better answer. And at first, John said, no. But then later, when he understood it better, he said, yes, I think that's right. I never did quite get whether John truly understood what Jordan was saying or not, but he did capitulate that, yes, that's right. But there's something very deep about that point in the video because something I learned like 40 years ago at a conference, was that the harder you push against something that you think is damaging to society, when it swings back, the pendulum is going to come back so hard, it's going to go completely the other direction. You're going to miss the center point and it's going to ram off over here. And so there is a way in which it's counterproductive to push too hard against something. And maybe it is better to simply keep providing the truth and goodness and beauty as a sample, as a model for people to see. Yes. Now, I think that's a debate that could be had between those two guys, but I don't think that, I'm not sure John got what it was that Jordan was trying to say. And I'm not sure Jordan maybe understands the danger of pushing too hard. Now, I don't know if you ever follow politics. There was a time 10 years ago when I followed politics a lot. And I remember this, who was that guy? Now I can't even remember his name. Everybody made a big deal out of him. And then he died when he was about 45. He was the one that got the Republicans really pushing hard against the Democrats and to go in and try to play the same game of anger and vitriol and what was his name? Why can't I can see him? I'll have to put it in the comments afterwards. But anyway, everybody thought he was the guy, and they all started doing what he said, and they all started being very angry in all of their discourse and everything, thinking that that's going to be the answer. We've got to hold our ground by being angry. And I think that was just so detrimental to the whole discourse on both sides, because then you lose the thread. If everybody's just angry with everybody, where's the thread, you know?
Well, yeah, I think more to the point, though, I mean, one of the problems I see that's a very deep problem is people keep, and Paul does this too, and I think Paul does it best, but I think using the language of tribalism is bad. Like, just don't even go, like first of all, I don't, like, people need to use a browser, right? Mm-hmm. If you go look at voters, we don't have 2 buckets for voting. Mm-hmm. We have 3. How is this tribe on tribe? If there's 3 buckets, somebody explain this to me, right? And most people are in which bucket? The one that is neither extreme. Mm-hmm. Most people are moderates. They don't believe in either of these camps. Like, they don't believe in those camps. They don't identify with those camps. It's like 80%. Mm-hmm. Like, where are we getting this tribe on tribe thing? And I think that's the problem, is that when you say, oh, you guys over there, you're all the same, like you're all like bad, or you're all doing something wrong, then you validate their tribe. But I don't think they have a tribe. Like, I don't, like, you know, and this has been pointed out throughout the years in politics for a while. Like,
well, so then how is Jordan Peterson not doing that when he takes off after the postmodern Marxist?
Right. So I don't think he's putting them in a tribe. I think what he's saying, and rightly, is that there's a postmodern neo-Marxist ethos, but because it's postmodern, it's always destructive. So I had somebody recently asking me a question like, well, you know, there's these people with, you know, critical race theory, and there's these people with, you know, environmentalism first, and how is everything not against them? And it's like, no, they're against each other. Like, they're just little tiny churches or little tiny religions. Like, they're not, they may all think they're fighting the system, whatever they conceive that to be is not relevant, but the system isn't fighting them. They're all fighting each other. That's really what's going on, because they're not big enough to build anything themselves, right? Like, and that's really what this is. It's a fight of a bunch of small groups, small tribes of people, right? And who with bad aims, too specific an aim, will say like, well, the most important thing is equity, right? Well, that's a small group of people. There aren't enough of them to make whatever equity is happen. And they don't even agree on what equity is or what it would look like, right? They just think they do, right? And then they're fighting against the people who think, no, we got to save the environment. We can't be doing electricity anymore. We need the environment. It's got to come.
So what it is all these competing focal points. Everyone wants to be the fulcrum of history. And so there are all these competing focal points. And in a piece of artwork, what happens when you do that is obviously you lose unity.
Right.
But you also lose the meaning. You lose the communicative potential
The
of the
Gestalt.
work.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what's happening. And so I think pointing out this postmodern neo-Marxism is correct. And I have my own theories about where it comes from, which are all based, by the way, on the 4Ps model. So
Oh,
we
so
could go
you
into
mean,
that someday
so
too.
when you say pointing out the postmodern neo-Marxism is correct, I think what you're saying then is what he's saying is that each one of these competing focal points is animated by this postmodern neo-Marxist ethos.
Yes.
And and
Yes.
so then in a sense, each one of them is their own little identity group. And
Yep.
all these identity groups are fighting with each other. And ultimate
Right.
intersectionalism is going to completely dismantle everyone into all these little individual identity bits that don't have any more cohesive to the community.
Well, I think they'll stay cohesive. Like this is where tribalism is not wrong. They'll stay cohesive to the tribe. The thing where the tribalism metaphor breaks down is that there aren't two tribes, but there is, say, a tribe. We'll throw it out there. We'll say there's a tribe of Christians, and that's a very large tribe, and you ain't bringing that down. That's not going to happen. There's way too many of them, and that would be one tribe in some sense, but they don't have a single identity, and they're able to get away with this. Why can you get away with not having to have a single identity? Well, my thesis is that that's because they have ethics. They have an ethical, we'll call it a substructure, although I hate that terminology. We'll call it a substructure of ethics. Right? They have a way to navigate the ethical landscape, is the way I like to phrase it. These groups, the reason why they turn into identities unto themselves is because they're trying to fit ethics in. And the only way to do that is to, and it doesn't work, but the only way they can think to do that is to bring everything down to a single thing. I see the color of your skin, therefore I know whether or not you're good or bad. And that's it. So that solves the ethics problem. To some, I mean, it doesn't really, right? But in their mind, it solves the ethics problem. And it's simple. Right? It's real easy. Now I don't have to think about it. But
well, let me give you a framework here to think about this. I've had a lot of conversations with Glenn, the physicist. I don't know if you've heard any of them. One of his things that he talks about in terms of physics and mathematics is this idea of the inside and the outside. And the simplest picture that he talks about is the idea of a watch. Whether you have a working watch or a pile of watch parts, all the gears and all of that, they're both of equal complexity or equal complication, but the working watch obviously can accomplish something because everything is in the proper order. But from the inside of the watch, everything looks very complicated and ordered and has to go in a certain way. And it's understandable from inside what all is happening, but the purpose of it isn't visible until you get outside that boundary.
right.
And then on the outside, you can see, oh, this is to tell time, and it's very simple to operate. I just watch the hands go around, and if it runs out of energy, I twist the dial. So I have this simple mechanism. Well, now, if you look at that on the bad side, you have a group of people very diverse in thought and every aspect of what makes us all persons and individuals and everything all together in a group. But I want to make that group easy to interact with. I attach an identity to it from the outside.
Right.
And now I can manipulate that group. I can move that group around. I can think about that group in an easier way because I've attached an identity to the outside
Right.
that is not, so this is the bad side, right? It's an incorrect it's a category error because what's inside that is really very complex.
Right.
So any one of these identity groups within them are incredibly complex. And if they were interacting with each other based on their own personal complexity, there would be a lot of richness and potential for creativity within the group. But if they're taught to only interact with each other according to this single identity, then you've lost all the potential.
Right. That's true. And also, where are these groups coming from? And then I'll loop in Jonathan Peugeot's parasitic storytelling, right? They're all feeding off a host. And then this gets back to Tom Holland and right, Dominion and all that, right?
And
it's
Jordan Peterson's incomplete ideologies. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I just came up with a formulation recently. It's cults are groups that point at each other or at a single thing, right? That's internally referenced. And then ideologies don't necessarily point at themselves, but they're not open to ideas. They're not, they're still focused around a single thing. And then a religion is something that tries to encompass everything, or not just encompass, but accommodate everything. And I think that's the difference between a cult, an ideology, and a religion. They're sort of in a hierarchy, if you will.
Well, I mean, Jordan Peterson differentiates an ideology from a religion in that the totality of the archetypal story is evident in a religion, but in an ideology, it's a crippled archetypal story. There's pieces missing.
And a cult is more crippled.
It's the tyrannical father and the
devouring mother.
The earth mother, the good side of the mother. It's always the tyrannical father, and the good side of the mother is the I think he called it the leftist ideology.
Or the good side of the mother and the bad side of the mother and the good side of the father. Like it's right. It's very binary, right? It's very false dichotomy, right? And I think that's right. And then a cult is just basically around either only a charisma or only a concept or only one thing. So it's not even around an archetypal idea. Cults are around local non-archetypal ideas. And they all use the same mechanism. Like they're all feeding off the bones of their ancestors of the archetypal storytelling process. But again, to Peugeot's point, that's parasitic, and so eventually it'll wear out. The question is, does it take us with it?
Since you brought up father, I just want to tap back on something you said about Tracy saying that Jordan was looking to John as the father. But what immediately jumped into my mind when you said that at the time was, well, actually, I think Jordan was looking to John as his cultural informant.
That's true. That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. Years ago, when I went to Japan as a missionary, I had to go through 6 weeks of missionary training. And one of the things that they did was to teach us how to find a cultural informant. Like you're going into a country where you don't know the language and the language has never been written, right? So what do? You can't learn the language from a book. You have to learn it from a person, but that person doesn't know your language. So how do you go about this? You have to find someone in the group that can be a cultural informant and a language informant for you. And then you work with them to try to communicate with them on some other level besides each of your languages. So you have to find a way to, knit your minds together somehow. And this is a cultural informant. And I think Jordan is very well aware that he's been out of the loop for 5 years and that John has continued on in his academic studies and his research and everything, and understands a lot of these ideas at a deeper level than Jordan does. And he wants to catch up. So he's looking at John as his cultural informant.
Well, maybe to some degree. I mean, I think I find the thesis that Jordan, who reads every book of every author that comes on, before he interviews them, wouldn't just read all of John's papers. And I think there's only been 4 or so in the past 5 years, is a little bit of a strange presumption.
Well, then why did he ask him 4 times to explain the 4 Ps?
Well, so it's sort of interesting. So the 4 Ps thing, I don't know if anybody notices, John's tried on at least 3 occasions that I remember, and I have all of John's stuff,
see what you're saying.
to put it together in a hierarchy. And this is the first time he did it. He's never done it before.
I wondered about that because I thought I'd never heard him do that before. And I haven't watched, I've only watched enough of John that I need for my project because I have a lot of other things that I watch. So I thought maybe I know his.
He might have very recently, but I watch an awful lot of his stuff. And then I've got my little informant network, my cultural informant network. And I don't think he's ever done it. I think he did it on the fly in that conversation. And I think that's the only way he could have done it. I think
Jordan was poking him.
Well, I think
I think John's thesis about dialogos is absolutely correct, because John's brilliant and I don't see anything wrong with that. You go places at dialogos you're not going to get on your own. You're not going to get anywhere else. And what better intellectual interlocutor than Peterson? Like, they've already done this stuff before, publicly at least twice, only once recorded, right? And then this one, but probably before, right? And so I think Jordan's up to date on all of John's published stuff, and probably a few things that he has access to that we don't. I know John at one point sent us a paper that he wrote on the fly for us about the 4 Ps when we're in the middle of our debate about the model. We've renamed the parabolic the poetic, by the way. Manuel decided it would be called the poetic. I updated the slide a little bit. We've got some stuff going on with that. We're still working on a larger model, but I think that was the first time John had done that with that model.
Well, so is that when Tracy said Jordan is looking to him as the father, does she mean that he's going into the belly of he's going in and rescuing the father from the belly of the whale to get John?
Well, if you want to take his teasing seriously, where he's trying to draw John out, then I would say that was what that was. And did it follow the archetypal pattern? I mean, it's a good observation. I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a reasonable interpretation of what was going on there. He's very much trying to rescue John back into the religious frame. And I very much saw that in this talk.
Oh, Jordan, yeah, God, I saw over and over again.
Yeah, repeatedly.
Trying to get him into the religious frame.
Right. And John's going, well, no, I don't want to be a religious frame. And then Jordan's going, that sounds awful Christian of you, John. And he's going, well, yeah, it is, right? And then trying to continue on as if he wasn't just preaching. And, it was just stunning. It was a stunning, and that's the other thing. People are missing the interplay. Like I said, at the end of Paul's third video here, he started to get it. He's like, oh, he looks like he's playing with John. No, he was playing with John all through the talk. He was playing with John the whole time. So yeah.
I have only watched a little bit of Paul's second video. That's the only part I've watched.
Yeah, I've got comments on the first and second ones. You might want to read those.
Okay.
Yeah, I did long comments. I didn't get to them right away because I got a lot going on and I've just been way behind on videos. But I've been putting in these huge comments like, no, you're misunderstanding what's going on, Paul, right? Like, because I was all flustered. Like, why are all these smart people not seeing what I see? Like, because again, because they can't give me a critique. They're making these crazy statements like, well, Jordan has no idea what John's talking about. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. No idea. But people made that statement. I was like, no, Jordan's way up to.
Well, I mean, at one point, I can't remember what it was they were particularly talking. Oh, Carl Friston or something like that. And John made some other comment, and Jordan brought him back around, and he said, I wrote about that, and I had just again stumbled onto a paper of Jordan's that I had read last year, and just stumbled upon it again this week. Something Jordan wrote about 10 years ago, long before this whole thing ever started, where he's likening these behavioral states of uncertainty and anxiety to entropic states, and using entropy as a measure of uncertainty and anxiety. And in that paper, he goes back and he cites Friston and all of this work on the dissipative, whatever it is, that John was talking about. Dissipative states, I think, offloading entropy.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I would say John's less familiar with Jordan's work than Jordan is with John's work, because Jordan has a lot more work.
Jordan wasn't familiar with it, but Jordan was very familiar with it.
Yeah, Jordan has a lot more work than John does published. So to be fair, like, it would take John a while to catch up, and some of it doesn't look connected, but my guess is that Jordan's connected everything he did with alcohol addiction and all the papers up to all the same ideas, just because when you watch Maps of Meaning,
and maybe you watch Maps of Meaning, that's not the same as reading the book. Reading
the book. I got the book. I kind of started it and then stopped, but I did get the book on your recommendation, so it's here. I have it in the other room.
Yeah, well, reading the book is a whole other experience, because every sentence is a data compression. I don't know if you ever watched his video where he talks about this one paragraph in Nietzsche, and he spends 45 minutes dissecting one paragraph in Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Well, he talks about how every sentence of Nietzsche's could be a book, and Nietzsche himself said, a paragraph of mine could fill a library.
Yes.
That's the way maps of meaning is. And not only does every sentence do that as you're reading it, every sentence opens up this space in your mind into all the connections of everything you've ever thought and imagined. And then when he lays out the whole thesis of the book over the course of the book, and then you get to the last 2 pages, he collapses all of that into these last 2 pages. And as you're reading those sentences, each of those sentences reopens the book to you in a new way at every level. So I've never experienced anything like that in reading any book outside of the Bible. When I read the Bible lives that way to me.
Yeah, it unpacks in that way. Yeah.
Just the way, John Vervaeke was saying, Plato unpacks for him that way. And Jordan says the Bible does that too, John.
Right,
And here's the thing. Now, I don't know where you're coming from on this whole Christian thing, but I'm just going to say, from my perspective, the fact that a lot of stuff that's in the Bible is in Plato doesn't bother me in the least, because from the beginning of humanity, God has been revealing himself, and people have been striving to understand that and writing about their thoughts and their connections with what God has been revealing to them. And so, of course, everything from the beginning of time is going to have echoes of these truths until it's, finally written down in the Bible that we have now. I mean, the fact that truth is found elsewhere is not the least bit surprising to me.
Right. No. Yeah, that's very much the Christian ethos that I've been getting from the crazy Christians on BOM, for example. I get it now. I get why they're not bothered by these things.
Yeah.
Of course, to them it's like, well, duh, of course, right? Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up Plato. So the one thing that I found the most interesting was the part of the David Fuller PVK talk that we watched, the Rebel Wisdom one.
I didn't watch, so tell me about it. It's so frustrating. One of the things that Fuller said, and there's Paul, like Pastor Paul, right? Fuller says, well, Jordan keeps going back to the same old tired stories. And I was like, there's so much wrong. And Paul didn't say anything. You do that, man. Like, that's what preachers do. They go back to the same old I'm pretty sure he's reading the same book, right? Like, have they switched books in the Christian Reformed Church? Or did I miss it? Said that Paul or David?
No, David said it, but Paul didn't push back. And then the real problem with that, we'll set Paul aside, right? We'll set Pastor Paul aside and say, the problem with that is that John, and I think he said it in this talk, although maybe not, but he said it before. I go back to Plato again and again, the same book, and I get more out of it, right? And I think that's what happened in this conversation. I'm sure if I were to watch the conversation again, and I have not done that yet, although by proxy, because I'm watching Paul's commentary, I'm watching it a second time, right? I'm getting more out of it in terms of the depth of what they were talking about. Although I take pretty good notes, that was the toughest note-taking session I've ever had in my entire life. And like I said, I think it took 4 or 5 hours to get, I think it's 4, 5.5, 6 pages of notes. And that was the best compression I could do. And I'm sure I left stuff out. So, but I think this is that well. And so why are you looking for new stories? Like, what is it that David Fuller's looking for from new stories from Peterson? Because I would argue John doesn't have any new stories either. I don't know how many times he's told the story of the Buddha and grief like that. I think he's told that story 4 times at least on video that I know of, and I haven't seen all his stuff. So like, they're all using the same old stories, but these stories, the same story applied in a different context, has a new meaning. And that's, I don't know if I told you this, Karen, I have a YouTube channel called Navigating Patterns.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. I got to get there.
I know. Well, I'm slow rolling it. I've been kind of waiting for graphics and some other stuff, but I have a bunch of content on there. And aside from my model videos, which I think are pretty awesome, you'll definitely appreciate those. I've got a video on meaning and words. And what I talk about there is basically, John's term is transjective for this. That words have content, definition, and they have context up here. So that's one line. And then the transjective is what pops out of that. That's meaning. The meaning's not in the word. The meaning's not in the context. The meaning is the intersection of those two things. Like, that's.
It's not transjective, Mark. It's this.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, the
sure.
meaning is at the intersection between the content and the context. Yes. The meaning
So
is at the intersection of the accuracy and the expression.
maybe, yeah, yeah. That
Well,
doesn't sound wrong either.
you have to know the depth of what I mean by accuracy and expression. But the conversation I just had with Michael, we unpacked that for an hour and a half. So it'll be there. I haven't published it yet since I just got on to talk to you. So
Oh, okay. Oh, that's great.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll check that one out for sure. Yeah, I think that's right. So that's one of the things I talk about in one of my videos. So I've got a bunch of little. They're all like I think my longest one's 19 minutes, except for the conversation I just posted. But yeah, I'm going over these things in little chunks. And I think that's what people are missing. Like there's more meaning there because you can take the same story and apply it, because when you read a story, you're in dialogue with the facts of your life, the
Mm.
condition of your life in the moment, and the story. And so when you read a well-written story, say a sacred story, that's what sacredness is to John's definition, to my understanding. I hope I'm getting that correct. If I'm not, John will smack me down, I'm sure. That's what makes it sacred, is the fact that you can go back again and again and get more out of it. So why David Fuller needs more stories or different stories from Peterson, I don't know. That same story of Genesis, I think Peugeot would argue this, you can put that everywhere and it just keeps giving you and giving you and giving you, and you keep learning more and getting more meaning and
Well,
getting
you're
better
looking for
understanding.
another story because you don't want to see yourself in that story.
I'm glad you said it and I didn't have to say it. Yeah, pretty much.
Well, I mean, I'm preaching to myself. I mean,
Sure.
that would be the reason that I avoid that story, is because I don't want to see myself in there. Because any one of the stories that you read, you see over time, you see yourself as a different one of the characters within the story. So,
Right.
so it, you know, and I very seldom see myself as the hero. I'll tell you that.
Oh, no, that's not good.
Yeah.
Positive affect.
Well, so positive affect has its good side and its bad side, like
As with
everything else.
everything. Yeah.
One of the things that they were talking about with the whole Philia Sophia is that it's all good. I mean, they made it sound as though that's all
Right.
good, but that's really not true. I mean, if you're
Right.
talking about love of wisdom, it depends on what your motive is. If you love wisdom for its own sake, because of the beauty and goodness and truth that's in wisdom, that's one kind of love of wisdom. But if you love wisdom for what it can do for you, or for how it can give you the fast track to being like God, as
Right.
Eve did when she ate the apple as a way to circumvent waiting upon God for the knowledge of good and evil. She went after it with what Jordan would call ill-gotten gains. She went after it,
Unearned wisdom.
yeah, unearned wisdom. And so so there's a good and a bad side to everything,
Right.
depending on all of this context and content and everything.
Right. And we don't like that. We want a single one hit answer. And I think, yeah, I mean, the other thing is, right, there's all this philosophizing that goes on. I say, oh, it's terrible. I go on the Discord server and we're philosophizing to some extent, right? But we're pragmatists. So we're trying to get a framework that we can build answers in. And we have a lot of answers, actually. So thank goodness, there are a lot of things we can do, right? But yeah, if you're just going after wisdom and you're never implementing wise action, I mean, that's another aspect where maybe it's not the best thing. And the interesting thing that they both agreed on that I thought was absolutely wrong in the talk, and I'll just kind of tease this. I know we'll do, hopefully, it sounds like we're going to be able to do a breakdown, you and I. That would be great.
I hope so. I hope we can do a bunch of episodes on this. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good. That would be wonderful. But one of the things I'll tease is that in the talk, they both agree that Philia Sophia is much more popular than Philia Nikeia. And I'm just like, well, you guys haven't read any of the science on that, like none of it, because that's the opposite of the truth. But what they have found is they've found that there's a deep need and want for it. So they've found the audience that's interested in that, right? And there's some overlap with the Joe Rogan audience, right? There's some overlap with some of these other audiences, but that people really do like Philia Nikeia better because they really prefer answers over open-ended questions, which is what the Sophia gives you more than anything else. So I thought that was like, I was like, oh, is that what you guys think? Because you talk to somebody like God Sad or something, right? And it's very clear
I mean, this is how social media works. It's Nicaea. It's all about victory, right? It's all about answers.
Yes, but the thing I think that's missing there is if you look at Philea Nicaea, which is the strive for victory, the ideal is always the judge. So,
Right.
so you can think, oh yeah, I want Philea Nicaea, but you're not taking into account that the ideal is the judge, because you're running against somebody else in the race and you want victory, but you inevitably have to judge yourself against the one who wins. And even if you win, then you still find that you haven't found the meaning that you hoped for in that win, because there's still another ideal beyond that you have to go striving for.
Yeah, there's no meaning in victory.
Well, but there is this, which it's the striving for victory, or striving for excellence, or striving to
there's meaning in the striving.
Vision that when your vision outruns your skill, you are forced to develop the skill that you need to manifest your vision. But you can, by the time you begin to try to manifest the vision with the new skill, you have a bigger vision.
Right.
So your vision is always moving ahead of you. So you can never meet it. So to say that Philea Nicaea is more popular with people, I think that's only as a spectator and not as a participant.
Maybe for the best participants, but maybe in social media, or for the best participants in the best games. But I think in social media, because they just gin up random games of craziness, right? This goes back to what we were talking about earlier with all these little religions, right? Competing for each other, right? When you're trying to be the top of a hierarchy that doesn't matter, it's all Nicaea, right? And then because they get to the top and then they find out, oh, well, but there's nothing here. I'm not in charge of enough people. I can't build, right? And so those things are parasitic and they collapse. So
because
I think it's the
they're
same
competing
thing.
in false hierarchies.
Exactly.
So there's nothing above the hierarchy.
Right. So
there's no judge.
There's no judge. Right. And
wow.
So to your point, right? To your point, if the goal is not in the struggle, then you're not going to strive. Right. The struggle has to be there. The element of struggle has to be there per se. So if the element of struggle, because struggle is meaning. I mean, this is I think Peterson says that pretty much, right? The meaning's in the struggle. Like you've got to pick up your cross and clean your room. Why are you cleaning your room? That's a struggle. Yeah. Cleaning your room's a struggle. Don't look at my room, by the way. It's definitely a struggle. I can tell you firsthand.
So these Antifa guys find meaning in their struggle, but there's nothing above the
No, they're trying to find meaning in their struggle.
Yeah.
Right? So their struggle is to get to the top of the hierarchy, and they get to the top of the hierarchy and there's no meaning. And so they can't struggle anymore. And then they lose meaning again. Right. And then they find another hierarchy to try to, right. Or they gin one up. Usually what they're actually doing is ginning one up. Like, no, I'm the most Antifa-like, well, I'm more of an anarchist, right? And then that's how they come up with these things. That Paul did a critique on Michael Malice and Jordan Peterson, and then they did a follow-up on that with Ginger Bill, which I found very interesting. And the problem is that when you listen to somebody like Michael, and I love Michael Malice, by the way, absolutely love the guy. Saw him in Tim Pool. I don't watch Tim Pool anymore, but I used to watch Tim Pool whenever Michael Malice is on. I was like, this is great. I really like him, but he's wrong. Like they're just making up political positions that aren't real political positions and saying, see, I can fit somebody in this category. And these people in this category. And people do that to me all the time. And I'm like, I don't know or care about these categories. This is not meaningful. These categories are not meaningful categories. I'm not saying they're not categories, but categories are arbitrary. So I only care about meaningful categories. Well, now the number of categories now is down quite a bit, from infinite to very few. And there's probably many more invalid categories than valid categories. I don't think that's controversial either. And so when it's meaningful, then you have a hierarchy you can struggle to the top of, but never reach the top of. That's a meaningful hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
And where else are you going to find that but a religious hierarchy? And then anything you try to make that has that quality is going to be a failed religion, either an ideology or a cult.
Yep. That was a pretty good what would you say? Pretty good summary, I think, of the of a very big idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that blends into the talk. If you're looking for something specific from the talk, then the talk can't continue because it will achieve that goal. This talk did not achieve a goal of that type. The goal of this talk was for both men to go deeper into their own ideas, and that happened. And from my perspective, it was beautiful. And I totally understand if you don't get the talk. Absolutely, man. It was hard. I'm not sure I got all the points out of the talk for sure. And I'm pretty much an expert on these two guys, at least so far as an expert can be on these people and their philosophies. I'm fairly well studied, it's not just the videos, right? It's sitting on the Discord server, talking to people and people coming in and fighting with the ideas of the game A, game B, people coming in and, all this stuff, right? So we're really wrestling with this stuff. We're trying to own it as much as we can.
So we're going to follow up. This is just a little summary talk here, and we're going to follow up with some taking it apart bit by bit. Hopefully we can get one of those done the first part of next week. But I want to leave you with something that I ran into yesterday. I'm preparing for a talk that I'm going to do on Saturday on my whole art paradigm as, the whole creativity paradigm as being the navigator between order and chaos. And in preparing for that, I was listening to one of the videos that I had done earlier with Glenn about entropy, because there's so much in that. And at the end of the conversation, towards the end of the conversation, we talked about something that reminded me of the whole discussion that Jordan and John were having about the roadmap. That's one I really want to pick apart, because there's so much in that about what I've been thinking about for a long time is how is it that we align ourselves with reality? What does that process look like, right? So I want to talk about that. But in this discussion that I was having with Glenn, one of the things that he mentioned is that over time, the DNA degrades because of increase, not because of increase in entropy, but entropy does increase. And so over time, DNA degrades. And the only thing that keeps life going is that you have to have the original to go back to. There's a sense in which entropy is forgetfulness. So as the DNA degrades, it forgets how to get back to the original.
Right.
So you have to have a copy of the original.
Right.
And we have that copy in our DNA that gets transmitted to the next generation. But he said, thankfully, we have two copies, one from the male, one from the female. And that acts as an error correction device to keep the little degradations that are in each one of them from multiplying and becoming too much of that. This is why we don't intermarry with family members, right?
Right.
But having the male and the female brings in two different sets of DNA that can interact with each other for to provide a better solution. It is very like the left and right hemispheres of the brain, and it's very like John and Jordan.
Yeah.
There's a built-in error correction device in two minds working on an issue.
Right.
But anyway, this idea of how we have to, in order to get back to reality, there has to be outside the system, there has to be some knowledge of the original.
Yes.
Let me just
and
leave
John,
that there.
Yeah, John talks about that, the ground of being. And Jordan agrees about the ground of being. But I think John is all bottom up and Jordan is all top down.
And they got to get together because it's both.
It's a beautiful thing. And then, maybe we can go through the first 20 minutes of the video in our next talk and see what's there. Because I didn't notice this 20-minute marker. Now I'm all curious. What did I miss?
Okay, that sounds like a plan. Let's join up by email and figure out a day. Okay.
Excellent.
Okay.
Sounds
Thanks,
wonderful.
Mark.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.